everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, and welcome to our interview session today, where we discover what's new in the world of pet food. I'm Molly Coleman from Bühler, joining from Melbourne, Australia. Our guest today is Kate Vlietstra. She's from Mintel. She's the Global Food and Drink Marketing Specialist there. One of her focus areas is pet food, and so we're very lucky to have her here to talk about what's new in pet food, what's on the way, and what we've experienced in recent times. Welcome today, Kate.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Where are you joining from today?
I'm joining here from London today.
Very cool. Is the weather good?
It's okay. We're moving towards autumn now. We're seeing a lot of autumn leaves, so it's getting a little bit chilly.
Lovely, lovely. Well, speaking of that, I suppose just to get the pandemic out of the way, we have seen the effect of COVID on pet food industry. We've seen pet ownership and companionship skyrocket as people are looking for that connection during lockdown. Other than that, what do you think the effect of COVID has been on the industry at large?
So I think you've really hit the nail on the head there. The pandemic has seen a huge surge in pet ownership, and that's partly down to companionship. People are obviously looking for that furry addition to their lives, but it's also because people have had more time to actually cope with the commitment of having a pet. So, for example, we've seen the data really pointing towards this surge of pet ownership, and that's really prevalent among younger people, which makes sense. We know that younger people are more likely to face anxiety and stress at this time, and so many of them are turning to pets. So, for example, in the UK, we've seen that over half of 16 to 34s have either acquired an additional pet or got their first pet during the pandemic. So it's been a really huge increase. And we've seen that has actually translated into sales as well. So in China, we've seen that actually over a third of pet owners have been spending more on pets since 2019, which is, of course, fantastic news for the pet industry. And we're seeing that across every aspect of pet, whether that's meals, treats, toppers, other products, and even technology. Now, in terms of looking forward, I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens with pet food in the longer term. If we look to the US, we've sort of seen that after that initial pandemic-related spike, we've gone back to just steady growth. But actually thinking to Asia, what's interesting is how pet ownership is going to be changing that. So we've seen in Asia, because of the number of people living alone has really risen, that pet ownership has hugely increased. So looking over the last 5 years, for example, there's been an increase of 114% of pet owners just in China over the last 5 years. And you can really see how that will translate to huge impact on the industry.
Yeah, for sure. That's so interesting as well, because that pet ownership is not like the pet ownership we saw 20, 30, 40 years ago. This is really the pet as a companion and pet as part of the family, you know, and part of the family unit. Yeah. So how has that form of pets being an extension of the family changed the way that pet food operates in the market?
So I think it's a really interesting point you bring up, that pets really are part of the family. They're part of the household, and pet owners are really embracing that. And we're seeing that kind of opportunity really hitting home over the last year or so. So when I think about where the opportunities for pet food are, I'm really seeing that that's in the treats and toppers area. So to your point, whereas 20 years ago, pet food was much more about just giving your pets maybe 2 meals a day from a big bag of manufactured pet food. We're now seeing this humanization trend come in, where pet owners are really wanting to give their pets the very best, as they would their own families. And how that's materializing is we're seeing a big increase in interest and an increase in sales in the treats and toppers part of the pet food market. So you might have treats, which is something you'd use to reward a pet or to offer them a bit of extra nutrition. But what's really interesting is the toppers element. And that is something that pet owners are using more and more to offer a bit of personalization to their pet meals. Now, it could be to increase palatability. So it might be that they want to add a topper to their existing meal to encourage their pets to eat it more. I know I certainly do this with my little puppy. I try and encourage him to eat his boring food, we would call it, with something a bit more exciting on the top. But we're also seeing that pet owners will use toppers to add some nutrition. So much like humans will take supplements, vitamins and supplements, that's where pet owners would be using toppers here. And that kind of nutrition might be, things like removing plaque from teeth. It might be kind of calming and mental health benefits. It might be to do with a shiny coat. So there's a number of different reasons why people would use those toppers. And I think the great thing about them is they're discretionary. So whereas pet food itself isn't an expandable category, treats and toppers really are expandable. It's it's an elastic area where we can really add value. And it definitely does add an element of premiumization. They are more expensive than your regular dog or cat food. But the great thing for consumers is that they're risk-free. So whereas it's really important to phase the changing of a diet for one's pet because it can affect their digestive system, if you're simply adding a topper to an existing meal, it's less likely to cause an issue for your pet. And of course, you're only using a small amount as a pet owner, so that premium price you're paying will actually last a bit longer. But of course, for pet food companies, that premium price really, really adds value. And I think, you sort of mentioned this idea that pets are really part of the home. And that really taps into the trends we see within human food, where we're seeing a lot of people being interested in personalization. And that really taps into this here. So adding toppers and of course, treats to your pet's diet really allows pet owners to personalize and customize what they're offering their pets. And that might be as simple as giving them some variety. Certainly as humans, we need variety in our diets. And we're seeing that pet owners are really using these additions to offer their pets that kind of variety as well.
Yeah, for sure. That's really interesting that you say how much it's influencing not just human behavior, but also the purchasing decisions onwards from that. Mm-hmm. And I am interested in that. How are people finding out about these toppers or new pet foods? Are they seeing them on shelf, through media? What's the informer here? Is it vets? Is it a mixture of all three?
So we've seen a real change over the past few years, and a big part of that change really is social media, as you've alluded to. I think what's interesting is that we've seen social media really providing a wealth of information about pet food and pet nutrition, and that's absolutely fantastic. And there's a lot of information out there for consumers to learn from in this really important part of the pet industry. But of course, that does mean that consumers are confused by the amount of information there is. And that's something really important to recognize. We see this particularly among younger people, so perhaps unsurprisingly, as it's younger people who are using social media more frequently. So if we look to China and we look at the 18 to 29-year-old demographic, actually over half of them are more likely to buy pet products based on recommendations from a pet food influencer or a key opinion leader. And what we really see is a distinction between younger and older consumers. So while younger consumers, as I've mentioned, are more likely to be influenced by social media, that means that they are really open to alternatives and beyond price. And they're looking for differentiators. So that might be exclusivity or even creative concepts. So, for example, we've seen brands that might allow the consumer to use their packaging to create a cat house, for example. So once you've used the cat food, you can then reuse that packaging. And that kind of creativity really appeals to some younger consumers. On the other hand, we're seeing that older consumers are more likely to be engaged with price and really read into the value of pricing. And that's something that, of course, pet food companies need to be really mindful of. Now, looking specifically at social media, we've seen that, again, linking with the humanization trend, that trends we see in the human food domain are really coming through to pet food, and social media is helping to accelerate those trends. So, for example, that might be vegan or plant-based pet food being talked about more on social media, and also trends such as clean label, which has become really popular among human food. And we see that entering the pet food industry in the form of raw pet food, which lots of consumers are now showing an interest in. Now, of course, the real challenge here is that whilst there are some fantastic learning opportunities for consumers on social media, the actual information that's being shared isn't regulated. And there's a challenge there to actually ensure that consumers are doing the best for their pet and understanding the best type of nutrition that their pet needs. And I think that's where the pet industry can really step in and help there. Although, of course, it is a challenge when there is so much noise on social media at this time.
Yeah, for sure. And how do you think the pet industry is earning or maintaining that trust so that the consumer relies on them for the advice?
Yeah, so I think fortunately consumers are loyal and they really trust brands. And in the US we see over a third of pet owners would say that actually the brand name is their key purchase decision factor. Wow. So we do see that brand is really important, and I think that resonates really well with pet food companies. Of course, as I mentioned, social media will sometimes get in the way a bit because it does allow direct-to-consumer brands to thrive. And so, of course, there's added competition there, and particularly those younger consumers who, as we've heard, are the ones more likely to be buying pets now because they're more likely to be on social media and influenced by the messages they're hearing. That's something that mainstream pets brands need to be really aware of. I think we've seen some really nice examples on how brands are generating that trust, particularly when it comes to health, which of course is so important to pet owners. And we're seeing that by pet companies combining both the retail side and the medical side. So, for example, in Malaysia, there's a retail chain called Pet Lovers Centre, and they've actually now opened a vet pharmacy. So you've got that nice combination of the retail and the pharmacy side. And we've similarly seen in the US, the online retailer Chewy has actually now started a 24/7 kind of video, telehealth and pharmacy offering for all of their more sort of premium members. So you've got this really nice link up, as I say, between the retailer and the medical side, so that pet owners can really trust in what these companies are saying because they've got this professional veterinary expertise at their fingertips as well.
Yeah, for sure. You've highlighted a strong trend that we've seen in the last 10 years, which is veterinary endorsement. There's not many packets of pet food you'd pass that don't have a vet smiling on the front of them. I guess that being now kind of an old innovation, what are like you mentioned, pharmaceuticals, that's a huge area that's opening up. What other creative ways are brands trying to differentiate, and what other innovations are you seeing in the pipeline?
Yeah, sure. So I think one thing that I'm really interested in at the moment that I'm seeing a lot is this idea about customizable products. And I've kind of alluded to that earlier. And I think as we think about the humanization trend, we're really seeing pet owners wanting to offer their pets the best experience in whatever that might be, whether it's food or other products. And of course, they're really aware that their pets all have very distinct personalities and, of course, needs, much like we do as humans.
Yeah.
So this area really offers companies an opportunity to add value. So we actually see in the States that 2/3 of pet owners will spend more on customizable products. And when we think about millennials, that actually rises to 3/4 of millennials. So there's this huge group of consumers who really want brands to offer them something personalized for their pets. I mentioned direct to consumer before, and we've seen that there are lots of companies coming on the market that offer sort of tailored pet food where you can enter details of your pet, whether that's the breed of your animal and any health requirements they have, and you'll be sent their kind of bespoke tailored pet food to your door, which of course adds convenience as well, which is fantastic. Along that line of thinking about breed, we've seen lots of companies actually starting to look into offering pet food tailored to a certain breed. So in the UK, Royal Canin do a huge variety of different pet foods tailored to certain breeds. So thinking about dogs, you'll have a packet that's tailored to the needs of a Schnauzer or a Cocker Spaniel or a Chihuahua, for example. So I think that's really interesting to see how brands are offering that. We can also see that come through at retail. So one a bit closer to home for you, I know Coles and Melbourne actually have started offering a self-serve treat centre. So rather than necessarily buying a packet of all the same treats, you can go and simply do a bit of a pick and mix and buy the treats that you need for your pet at that time. So I think we'll be seeing more of that kind of approach. And then the really exciting part of that whole trend of customization and personalization is actually looking into DNA. And again, that's something we've seen really prevalent among humans over the last few years. You know, the number of people who have been buying DNA tests to really understand their own heritage and how that might impact their own health needs has really increased. And I think that's something we're going to be seeing more of when it comes to pets. We know in the UK there's a real interest in having the pet's DNA tested. And I think that will really shape the future of how pet food companies are approaching this idea of tailoring and personalization, because it really becomes very, very bespoke at that point.
Yeah, wow. I hadn't even thought of that. DNA, that's phenomenal. Like that seems very futuristic to me.
It's pretty cool, isn't it? I mean, I think lots of people, I certainly when I go to the park with my little dog, I'm often talking to other dog owners, and when I'm speaking to people who have had a rescue dog, then quite often they'll say they've done a DNA test to help them understand what mix of breeds they potentially have within their rescue animal, to help them understand the nutritional needs, but also the behavioral needs and preferences, I suppose, of that dog. So it's really interesting that level of understanding that we're starting to get to now.
Yeah, fascinating. And maybe that lends itself to the broadening of categories. Like, what sort of innovations are you seeing? You talked about toppers, treats being added. Are we seeing this stretch out of the category? So moving into, for example, I think you mentioned before we started talking about ice cream, and I've seen yogurt. Like, are these just humanization areas that we're going into, or is it more broad than that?
Yeah, we did talk about ice cream, my favorite subject. So I think, again, tying into this trend of humanization, what we're really seeing is that as pet owners are wanting to bond more with their pets and interact more with them, and that's been growing over the last few years, but I think has been really accelerated by the pandemic because people have spent so much time at home with their pets. We're seeing that pet owners want to really share experiences with their pets. And that's where some of these really cool innovations like ice cream for dogs come in. And that's really because pet owners are seeing their pets as a member of the family, and they want to give them the same kind of experiences that we have as humans. So we've got, for example, in the US, Ben and Jerry's have launched a range of doggy desserts, so ice cream for dogs. We've seen that on the kind of beauty and healthcare side as well. So the luxury beauty brand Aesop in Australia has also launched a skin and fur wash for pets as well. So seeing some really nice crossover between human brands actually going into the pet brands. But I think a little step further on from that is in terms of sharing experiences, just goes a little bit further, and that actually looks at how humans and pets can share the same food, which is obviously a little bit foreign to what we've maybe seen in the last couple of decades. But we're seeing a real interest in this. So, we know in the UK that nearly a third of pet food buyers would actually be interested in meal kits that they can share with their pets. And this actually came to fruition in the US earlier this year. So we saw an innovation from the brand Caesar called Bestie Bowls, which basically is delivered to the door, and it's a yours and theirs duo of food that you can literally share with your pet. So I think that's an amazing piece of innovation and an amazing area that we're going to see that much more of as pets become part of our lives, really, a bigger part of our lives. And I think sorry, please go.
Oh no, it made me think of a trend I've seen on TikTok recently, which is like pour charcuterie, taking cheese boards or charcuterie boards, for your pet and for your dog, which just cracks me up. But it's all about what you're saying, that shared experience.
Absolutely. And, again, if thinking about when I've spoken to other dog owners, I was reflecting with someone last week. I remember about 10 years ago in the very premium department store, Harrods here in London, there used to be basically a pet food bakery. And I remember at the time thinking, that's very niche, very premium, it's who is buying a birthday cake for their dog and spending a lot of money doing it. But now speaking to my friends who also own dogs and cats, this is becoming much more commonplace. People are celebrating the birthdays of their pets. They are becoming a part of the family, and people are willing to spend on that. So I think that bodes really positively for the industry.
Yeah, for sure. I think most of the topics we've covered today shows a real positive growth for the industry and the industry at large. Could you share any high-level figures with us about the future growth of the pet food industry globally?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, as I alluded to at the beginning, we have seen a fantastic growth in the industry over the last year or so, and that is starting to peter out, but we are still expecting a steady growth over the coming years. So I think it's a really positive place to be.
Yeah, great. And maybe on that note, we'll close, Kate. I thank you so much for your time today and sharing all your insights into the industry. We really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks. And for our audience, you can find Kate's details in the link and also find contacts at Bühler as well. Thank you for joining us today.